Dan Quinn is on the clock, and a veteran NFL executive already dropped the name of his replacement to one of the most connected insiders in the league months before training camp even opens. But before you go crazy with that name, I need you to hear exactly why the situation is not as cut and dry as people are making it sound, and what has to happen in the next few weeks for everything to shift. While that is brewing in Ashburn, Chig Okonkwo is out at OTAs doing things with Jayden Daniels that I have not seen since Ertz was at his best in burgundy and gold. His career numbers with 6 different starting quarterbacks in Tennessee are going to flip your entire read on what this offense can become. But there is one specific stat nobody is bringing up that could make him the most dangerous weapon in Blau's system, or the biggest risk on this roster if one thing goes wrong. And George Kittle just said something about Brandon Aiyuk on Pardon My Take that the entire DMV is completely misreading. It is not what you think. There is a second part of that quote that changes the whole conversation around whether Washington should go get him. And once I break it down, you are going to understand exactly why Adam Peters is not being slow here. He is being strategic, all of that right now. Raise hail, stop everything you're doing. Jason LaConfora of Sports Boom, one of the most veteran insiders who has covered this league for decades, published a story this weekend that nobody in the DMV should be sleeping on. This isn't clickbait. This isn't dead period filler. This is an insider with real sources inside NFL front offices telling the world that Dan Quinn is in a win or walk situation in 2026. And what I think is most revealing isn't even the Quinn part, it's the name they dropped as a possible replacement. Keep an eye on Sean Mcdermott there next year, a longtime NFL personnel executive told LaConfora. Just remember who told you first. When somebody who actually moves pieces in this league says that in June, before training camps open, they don't say it by accident. That's not casual speculation. That's someone with information that isn't publicly available yet, who wants to be cited when everything gets confirmed. But before we explode over McDermott's name, I need to set the full context here because a lot of people have been following this situation on the surface and don't understand the real layers of what's happening. How did we get here? In 2024, Dan Quinn arrived in Washington with a roster that nobody predicted would be this competitive. Him and Adam Peters worked together to build an offense around Jayden Daniels, brought in Cliff Kingsbury as offensive coordinator, and the result was 12-5, 2 playoff wins for the first time since 1991, and an NFC Championship game appearance where the Eagles absolutely embarrassed them 55-23. It was the best Commanders season since the Joe Gibbs era. Everybody in burgundy and gold was singing Quinn's praises. Then 2025 happened. Daniels played 7 games before they shut him down with a serious elbow injury. 7 out of 17. The team finished 5-12. In 1 year, they went from Super Bowl contenders to one of the worst teams in the conference. And what came after the season ended was the real signal. Quinn fired both coordinators, Kingsbury and Joe Witt, 2 in 1 year. That doesn't happen when a head coach is operating from a position of strength. That happens when someone with serious power inside the organization tells you to make dramatic changes, or the next conversation is going to be a different one entirely. And this is where LaConfora puts his finger on something I think is genuinely important and honest. He cites an anonymous general manager saying he believes the Commanders are seriously considering a head coaching change this winter. Then he adds something that I think is the most important line in the whole piece. When a team makes as sweeping staff changes as Washington did, the industry views that as putting the head coach on notice. That's accurate, and Quinn knows it. The structural problem with Quinn's situation. What worries me about Dan Quinn right now isn't his track record. His track record is real. He made a Super Bowl with Atlanta, rebuilt his reputation in Dallas running an elite defense, and had a historic year 1 in Washington. That doesn't disappear. What worries me are the surrounding elements that make 2026 particularly complicated for him. First, the schedule. The NFC East in 2026 is loaded. The Eagles are still the standard in this conference. The Cowboys are responding. The Giants have new pieces. Winning in that division has never been easy, and it's not getting easier. Second, the front office dynamic. Adam Peters has real power in this organization. LaConfora says it directly. Peters wields considerable power with ownership. That matters, because in franchises where the GM holds that kind of influence, the head coach is always in a more fragile position. If results don't come, Peters has the organizational capital to execute a change without it being traumatic for the franchise. That's a scenario Quinn can't ignore. Third, the ownership group. Josh Harris and David Blitzer are partners with experience running multiple sports franchises. They co-own the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA and the New Jersey Devils in the NHL. And as LaCanfora points out, new NFL owners historically have a short fuse. 2 seasons isn't enough time to know definitively whether a coach is the right long-term fit, but it's also not a lot of runway if year 2 ends at 5-12. How real is the firing threat? I want to be straight with y'all here because there are 2 valid reads on this situation and I don't want to sell you just one. The first read, which I think is the more likely one, Quinn survives 2026 if Jaden Daniels is healthy and this team wins 9 or 10 games. That's not impossible. The roster has real talent. The staff changes were made specifically to improve Daniels' situation offensively with David Blau calling the plays. And the fact that Quinn survived the end of 2025 when a lot of people were calling for his job gives him a layer of protection. Ownership decided to give him another shot. That's not nothing. The second red, the one no fan wants to sit with, but is completely valid. If the Commanders start 2026 slow, like 2-4 or worse, the pressure is going to accelerate in ways that no stability statement from ownership is going to stop. And when that happens, the available coaching market becomes critical, and that's where McDermott's name becomes enormously relevant. Why Sean McDermott makes sense in Washington. Sean McDermott was fired by the Bills after an overtime loss in the divisional round to Denver in January 2026. 9 seasons, 98-50 in the regular season, playoffs in 8 of 9 years in Buffalo, 6 postseason wins. This is not a coach who lost his job because he couldn't win. He lost it because the Bills decided they needed a change after not quite clearing the final hurdle to get to the Super Bowl, despite consistently having one of the best rosters in the AFC. That makes him the most attractive available head coach on the market, no debate, and he fits perfectly with what Harris and Blitzer have shown they value across their other franchises. Coaches with proven experience, playoff track records, and organizational stability. Doc Rivers and Nick Nurse with the Sixers. Sheldon Keefe and Lindy Ruff with the Devils. This is an ownership group that is not going to hire a first-time head coach when they have access to someone like McDermott. Does this mean Quinn is fired? No, not even close. Craig Hoffman from the Team 980 is right when he points out that the injury context around Daniels and Quinn's multi-year deal are real protective factors. But what this story tells everyone in the league is that the industry is already monitoring this situation. And when a veteran executive tells an insider of LaCanfora's caliber, keep an eye on McDermott there, that's not background noise. That is real information that someone wants circulating. My position, Quinn has to win. Non-negotiable, and I think he knows it. Okay, I needed that tension moment with Quinn because what comes next is completely different. This is what has me genuinely excited about Washington Commanders football in 2026 when the official Commanders website drops a piece about Chig Okonkwo wanting to be unleashed in this offense and then contextualizes it with Jaden Daniels' target numbers with his tight ends. I sit up and pay attention, and there's information here that I don't think most of the fan base is processing correctly yet. Who is Chig Okonkwo and why his numbers don't tell the full story? Chig Okonkwo was a 4th round pick in the 2022 draft. He comes to Washington on a 3-year, $27 million deal with $16.7 million fully guaranteed. That's starting tight end money, not depth money. Adam Peters signed him specifically to replace Zach Ertz, and that alone is a major statement. But here's what a lot of people are missing. Okonkwo spent 4 seasons in Tennessee, working with 6 different starting quarterbacks. 6. That's not an environment where a tight end can develop the trust and timing he needs to become a real weapon in the passing game. And despite that, he finished in the top 3 in receiving yards on his team in each of his 4 seasons in Tennessee, including a season where he led the Titans with 56 catches for 560 yards. The number I find most revealing is this: 1,105 yards after the catch across his entire career with the Titans. 5.7 yards per reception after the catch. That means more than half of his total yardage was created by him after the ball was already in his hands. That is not a system tight end who runs short routes and waits for the quarterback to gift wrap the play. That is an athlete who manufactures yards on his own. His combine time was 4.52 seconds in the 40. He led all tight ends at his combine, 4.52 for a tight end. That's receiver speed in a tight end body, fam. And then there's his catch rate. In each of the last 3 seasons, Okonkwo caught over 70% of his targets. That's not a guy dropping passes. That's a consistent, reliable receiver, what David Blau is building around him when a new offensive coordinator says publicly in June, before training camp, that he's really excited to kind of see him grow and talks about the explosiveness Okonkwo adds to the offense. That's not an empty compliment. That's a coordinator telling his tight end that he has a central role in the game plan, and Blau was even clearer beyond that. The offense he's designing is based on concepts from Detroit's 2023 system, a scheme that requires the tight end to be a weapon in space, not just a blocker. Okonkwo described it perfectly when he said, "The offense is designed to give us space." That's a player who already understands exactly how he's going to be used. The connection with Daniels in OTAs is what interests me most. Daniels in his first season targeted Zach Ertz 91 times. 91. He had 66 catches, 654 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Ertz was 34 years old and couldn't create yards after the catch the way he could in his prime. Okonkwo is 26 and just showed at combine level that the explosiveness is still very much there. If Daniels builds with Okonkwo the same level of trust he had with Ertz, and you add the fact that Okonkwo is infinitely more dangerous with the ball in his hands than Ertz was in 2024, we're talking about a tight end who could legitimately be the second most targeted receiver on this team behind Terry McLaurin. The wild card, the receiver room, and here's the part I think a lot of people are underestimating. The Commanders' receiver room behind McLaurin has real question marks. Treylon Burks has first-round talent, but a significant injury history. Rookie Antonio Williams needs time to develop. That means Okonkwo is not competing for targets in a deep established group. He's in a situation where Daniels' number 2 passing option is genuinely up for grabs. For defensive coordinators game planning against Washington, covering McLaurin is already a headache. Adding a 4-5-2 tight end who's going to see somewhere between 80 and 100 targets is a legitimate problem. Look, I could be wrong about this. OTAs in May and June without pads don't always predict what happens in September. But the combination of Okonkwo's metrics, Blau's system, and the chemistry he's already building with Daniels gives me real, concrete reasons to be excited. This isn't empty dead period hype. And to close, I need to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. Because George Kittle went on Pardon My Take on Monday and said something that's going viral for the wrong reasons. Everybody is focused on the positive part of what Kittle said, which is also true. I watched him run over 22 miles an hour and stop on a dime, so he's still got it, okay? Aiyuk is physically recovered, or at least he was when Kittle last saw him, somewhere around week 6 to 8 of last season. But there's a second part of what Kittle said that I think is more important and that most people are glazing over. When asked what the Commanders should expect from Aiyuk, Kittle responded with the line that's already circulating. But you guys have fun with that, I guess. You have fun with all that comes with it. That is not George Kittle being funny. George Kittle is one of the most loyal and protective teammates in this league. When Trey Lance arrived in 2021 and there were rumors they'd replace Jimmy Garoppolo, Kittle publicly defended Jimmy G with every single statement he gave. In 2022, when there was noise about culture issues with Aiyuk, Kittle defended him directly. He was the same guy every single day. He's been nothing but incredibly kind to every single person. That's the George Kittle who protects his teammates no matter what. The Kittle on Monday did not do that. He didn't back Aiyuk. He said he watched him run fast 8 months ago and then basically wished good luck to whoever takes him. That to me is the clearest signal of this entire situation. The Niners are done with Aiyuk. GM John Lynch has already said that Aiyuk has played his last snap in San Francisco. Aiyuk has been posting "Go Commanders" on Instagram and taking shots at his own franchise publicly for months. Adam Schefter has been talking on ESPN about Washington being Aiyuk's preferred destination because of his relationship with Daniels, former teammates at Arizona State. And here's the real question Commanders fans need to ask themselves: at what cost and under what terms? Because the Aiyuk situation is complicated. He signed a 4-year, $120 million extension before the 2024 season. Then he tore his ACL and MCL in week 7 of that year against the Kansas City Chiefs. He didn't play the rest of that season. And in 2025, he cut off all communication with the 49ers during the season, despite still being under contract. That led San Francisco to void approximately $25 million in guaranteed money for 2026. So the current reality is this: Aiyuk wants out. San Francisco wants him been gone. But the Niners still hold the leverage when it comes to getting compensation through a trade or simply releasing Aiyuk and letting teams sign him for far less. My position on whether the Commanders should go get him: proceed with caution. The obvious upside is real. Aiyuk at his best was all pro. 2023, 75 catches, 1,342 yards, 7 touchdowns, with a 49ers system that was way more run heavy than what Blau is designing. He's 28, he has a personal relationship with Daniels. Adam Peters knows him from his years in San Francisco, where Peters worked when the Niners drafted Aiyuk in 2020. But there are 3 factors that make me pump the brakes. First, he hasn't played in a real game since week 7 of 2024. Kittle says he saw him running fast in October of last year. That's 8 months ago. Nobody knows how a knee with that kind of injury responds when the real hits start coming in a regular season game. Second, the cap number. His current contract carries a significant cap hit for whatever team takes it on. The Commanders already have meaningful financial commitments to McLaurin and other pieces of this roster. Every dollar that goes to Aiyuk is a dollar that can't go to defensive depth or extensions for young players already on the team. Third, and this is the biggest one, the behavior. Aiyuk cut off communication with his team during an active season, with his entire organization. That's different from a contract holdout in the offseason. That's a character signal that teams cannot ignore no matter how much talent you're walking in with. I think Adam Peters is smart enough to know all of these factors. And I think if the 49ers release Aiyuk outright without asking for trade compensation, Peters evaluates that call. But if San Francisco wants first-round picks in return, that price is too high for a player who's been away from competition for nearly 2 years with that kind of recent history. Peters' patience here isn't indecision, it's strategy. That's everything I've got for today, fam. 2 stories that create real tension. 1 story that has my eyes wide open about the offensive potential of this team in 2026. Quinn knows exactly where he stands. Mcdermott is available, credentialed, and now publicly connected to this job. That alone should light a fire under everybody in that Ashburn building. But we also have Jaden Daniels healthy at OTAs, building real chemistry with a tight end whose numbers do things that Ertz hadn't been able to do in years. And that gives me concrete reasons to believe in what's coming. This franchise has waited too long for its next moment. 2026 is the year Quinn has to prove that 2024 wasn't a fluke. If he does, every one of these Mcdermott conversations disappears in December. Raise hail, always. Bro, if this breakdown gave you something today, hit the like, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me down in the comments. Do you trust Dan Quinn to save his job in 2026, or do you think Sean McDermott is coming to Washington next winter? I want to read every single reply.